So welcome to the first training in a four-part series. We are strengthening the workforce through integration of peer recovery services, and this is the Shifting Culture and Policy session. The 3 additional trainings in the series will be held on each Tuesday in August from 11 a.m. to 12:30. If you need to link to register, I'm going to drop it in a chat. I'm going to drop that in the chat right now for you. All right, you should be able to download that there. This training is funded in whole or in part through a contract with Illinois Department of Human Services Division of Behavioral Health and Recovery. This and all trainings in this series were developed by Peer Power in collaboration with peer recovery support leaders through Illinois. Peer Power is a national peer run company based in Illinois that develops peer leaders who positively impact the systems in which they live, work, and learn. Peer Power was birthed out of a need that Trenda Hedges recognized for special peer recovery support professional development. Peer Power contracts with community organizations, providers, state and federal departments, schools, and other entities to develop peer training and provide technical assistance to enhance the fidelity of peer services and further the integration of peer recovery support workforce. You can find more information on Peer Power by visiting our website at peerpower.net. I will drop that in the chat in a second. Just a little bit about me. My name is Toni Lynn Packus. I am a virtual event producer, and I am honored to be here with you today. Getting to partner with Peer Power is one of the greatest gifts as the founder of Be Heard, Be Healed Studios, where we specialize in creating virtual spaces that feel just as welcoming and engaging as being together in person. Over the past decade, I've had the privilege of producing and leading everything from small peer trainings to large-scale multi-day global conferences. No matter the size, we love helping people feel seen, supported, and fully present. My background combines virtual production with trauma-informed and peer-informed care. As a certified RAP advanced level facilitator and board certified mental health coach, much of my work centers around the work that all of you guys do, specifically with recovery, resilience, and making space for people to share their stories in a way that fosters growth and healing. So it's amazing to be here with you guys today. All right, today's session is being recorded. If you prefer not to appear in the recording, the only time you would appear in the recording is if you speak and are on camera. So if you prefer not to be in the recording, you could just keep your camera off, change your display name. Display names will not show as well unless you're speaking, and you can participate through the chat instead of speaking out loud. Whatever feels best for you. You may also choose to leave the session at any time. We support you in engaging in the way that feels most comfortable to you. You will have access to the materials. You will receive a copy of the slides after the session. We'll share them via email or post them on our Peer Power website. We do ask that you keep yourself muted when not speaking to minimize background noise. If you unmute and you see yourself being muted, but you want to speak, please know it's just because there's background noise. We're not trying to take anyone's voice away. We'll invite you throughout the session to raise your hand. Use the raise hand feature down in the bottom Zoom window. And if you would like to contribute verbally, we also encourage you to share your thoughts and reflections and questions in the chat box. I also wanted to just let you know if you have any audio or sound issues, if you click the down caret or up caret next to your microphone, you can switch your audio settings. If you need any help with that, you can also reach out to me in the chat. The chat will be open today for both questions and connection. Please feel free to greet others, share links, or offer insights. If we don't get to all your questions live, we may follow up by email afterward. For accessibility and inclusion, if you need any accommodations during this session regarding captions, visual descriptions, please let us know in the chat or by private message. You can message me directly. We want anyone to ensure that this space works for them. And as your producer, I will be your technical support today. So if you have any technical issues, you can try logging out and rejoining, but you can also message me in the chat. We do have quite a large group today, so if for some reason I don't get right back to you, please know that I am monitoring the chat and I will get to you as soon as possible. Now, let me get to introducing our facilitators for today. As previously mentioned, Trenda Hedges is the founder of Peer Power. She's worked closely with IDHS, DBHR on several peer integration projects, including the Illinois Warm Line. CRSS competency training, supervisor training, and provider forum. She's provided collaborative consultation and technical assistance on national and state initiatives, including the Michigan Warm Line, North Carolina Warm Line, and the SAMHSA National Guidelines for Crisis Care. She's the author of multiple trainings for peer support workers, supervisors, and organizational leaders that provide practical guidance on the fidelity of peer support services. Trenda creates spaces where people can bring their authentic selves to mutually learn alongside one another. Collaboration, integrity, mutuality, and transparency are values she holds dear. She believes in supporting the self-discovery process and creating opportunities for peers to highlight their strengths and skills. In addition to her lived wisdom, Trenda holds the Certified Recovery Support Specialist, CRSS, and the Certified Peer Recovery Specialist, CPRS credentials. She's also a certified advanced level RAP facilitator. Grounded in the wisdom of her lived experience, she also draws on formal education, holding a bachelor's degree in criminal justice and a master's in counseling. Outside of her work with Peer Power, Trenda supports women through her ministry, Wholehearted Counsel. Her interests include vegan cooking, gardening, watching the sunrise and set, jewelry design, music, singing, and just being. Mike Tyson is a person in long-term recovery and a certified peer recovery specialist. He's the founding board member of Take Action Today, a faith-based recovery community organization in Southern Illinois, and a founding member of the Southern Illinois Recovery Network. As the regional capacity developer for the Southern Illinois Resource and Advocacy Center, Mike collaborates with grassroots organizations and local stakeholders to enhance peer-based support services and not-for-profit infrastructure. Nationally, he serves as the executive director of the National Peer Recovery Alliance, where he strengthens and empowers peer support specialists nationwide. He's also a board member of the Illinois Certification Board. A convicted felon with limited education, Mike spent over a decade in the underground coal mining industry before enrolling in college at the age of 42. In 2022, he graduated magna cum laude from Purdue University Global with a BS in psychology in addictions. He completed his MSW in the University of Illinois at Urbana-Champaign in 2025 with a concentration in leadership and social change. This blend of lived experience and education enables him to impact various systems affecting individuals facing chronic substance use, mental health challenges, and homelessness. Mike resides in rural Southern Illinois with his wife and their 2 adult children and an exuberant golden doodle named Champ. So those are our our presenters today, and I would like to turn things over to Trenda to take it from here.
Thank you, Tony, for those introductions and all that you've done to produce this virtual event. We're truly grateful for your support. So as we kick off the training today, we think it would be helpful to know who's in this virtual space with us. So feel free to introduce yourself in the chat. Tony also just opened a poll where you can select what role you serve in. And we'd just like you to select your primary role. So you may serve in multiple roles, but for the purpose of this, just select what your primary role is. And if it's other, drop your role in the chat.
And if you do need to scroll down, I forgot to mention that. I didn't say anything about launching a poll, so I wouldn't have mentioned it. But if you do not see yours, you might need to scroll down. And we'll close the poll in 4 seconds. All right, there's your results.
Nice. Looks like we have a lot of program managers today. Equal numbers of peer recovery support specialists and directors. Good stuff. Some others, hopefully they drop their role in the chat. Loving it. It's good to know who's in the space with us because it really just helps us to be able to meet each of you where you are as well. Thank you. So Tony, do I need to close the poll on my end? Will that impact anything? Okay, thanks. All right, let's go to the next slide. So at Peer Power, we developed a position paper called Defining Peer Recovery Support to Preserve Role Integrity. Too often, peer peer roles are unintentionally diluted or misaligned due to either a lack of clarity or pressure to conform to systemic pressures like billing and documentation. To prevent this, we must root our efforts in a definition of peer recovery support that honors its distinct identity, evidence-based foundation, and transformational power. Peer recovery support is grounded in a unique model built on the integration of three components: lived experience, lived expertise, and training and reflective practice. Lived experience refers to the first-hand experience of navigating mental health and/or substance use challenges. That experience may include intersections with trauma, incarceration, and reentry, discrimination, or being unhoused. Lived experience is not academic or theoretical. It is deeply personal, encompassing the experience of surviving stigma, trauma, and systemic barriers while journeying through recovery. Lived expertise builds on lived experience and reflects the insight, wisdom, and skills developed through healing, growth, and self-determination. It is not merely surviving hardship. It is the ability to translate personal recovery into purposeful support for others. And finally, the application of lived experience in a service role requires intentional training and ongoing reflective practice, both of which are rooted in peer-developed frameworks. Peer-led training equips support workers with a deep understanding of the core values and ethics of the peer role: mutuality, shared power, hope, self-determination, and non-coercive support. It clearly defines the scope of the peer role and the boundaries that differentiate it from clinical or case management roles. Reflective practice further enhances this by creating space for peer workers to continuously reconnect with their values, process ethical dilemmas, improve self-awareness, and sustain personal well-being. This discipline of reflection ensures that peer work remains grounded, responsive, and in alignment with the foundational principles of the peer movement. These three components that you see on your screen: lived experience, lived expertise, and peer-led training with reflective practice, those together form the peer recovery support model. No single component on its own fully constitutes the peer support model, but rather it is that combination of those three that ensures fidelity to the role, upholds its transformative impact, and preserves its non-clinical, person-centered nature. Peer recovery support is not a general support role. It is not interchangeable with clinical treatment or social work. It is a distinct model that draws its power from the credibility, trust, and relational equity that only those with lived experience and lived expertise can offer when supported by robust training and a commitment to reflective growth. We also took a position of clarity around lived experience. While we acknowledge and deeply respect the lived experiences of family members, caregivers, and allies, particularly their roles in advocacy and support, it is important to us to distinguish these perspectives from the firsthand lived experience that defines a peer recovery support specialist. When we blur or conflate these different types of experience, we risk diluting the voice of people with lived experience of recovery, and that undermines the very foundation of the peer support movement. So as we move into the next section, keep this definition in mind. The concepts we discuss in this training series are only meaningful if they protect and elevate the authentic peer role, not replace it, dilute it, or make it unrecognizable. So before we cover the objectives in this training, let's just take a look at the results from the organizational culture and policy self-assessments that so many of you took when you registered for this training. I've been seeing them pop through my email over and over again, even this morning. This short self-assessment had 10 questions designed to assess how ready your organization's culture and policies are for peer integration. These are really exciting results. Based on their responses, 39% of respondents felt that your organizations are already transforming to align with peer integration principles. And another 46% felt that solid work was underway and just needed some refinement. This snapshot shows us how committed organizations in Illinois are to integrating peer recovery support into culture and policy. And I think it's like super exciting to see that. So let's get started. Here are the objectives that we're going to try to accomplish through the training today. We're going to define approaches and methods for organizational culture shift. Recognize the value of recovery-aligned terminology in all aspects of an organization's culture, and rewrite policies to be more recovery-aligned to convey your commitment as leaders in this field. So as we consider how organizations integrate peer recovery support and move toward recovery-oriented systems of care, it's helpful to look at 3 common approaches to systems change. These approaches reflect different levels of commitment, impact, and sustainability. So the first one is the additive approach. In the additive approach, recovery services are tacked on to existing systems, usually in the form of a single peer support program or a recovery group. These are often isolated from the rest of the organization. Think of it like adding a side dish to a meal that's already been prepared. The core treatment philosophy and operational structures remain unchanged. While this might increase access to recovery support in the short term, it rarely influences the broader organizational culture. Peers may feel unsupported, misunderstood, or even tokenized. And when resources are tight, these programs are often the first to be cut. So Tony's going to drop some reflection questions in the chat all throughout our slides. And the first one she's going to drop is, have you seen or worked in a program where peer support was added, but not truly integrated? And what impact did that have on staff and participants? So think about those questions. The second approach is the selective approach. This approach goes a step further. Here, some departments or services begin to center recovery principles. For example, you might have a peer-run drop-in center or a recovery-oriented crisis team. These changes may be viewed as pilot projects or isolated innovations, and they may operate with different values or policies than the rest of the organization. This approach can start to influence the broader culture, but it also creates friction if recovery values aren't supported across the board. It can feel like 2 different systems under one roof. And the third approach is the transformative approach. This approach is really where the real change happens. In this model, recovery values are embedded throughout the entire organization, from how services are delivered to how staff are supervised, how budgets are written, and policies are made. Peer roles are not an add-on. They're a core part of how care is conceptualized and delivered. Leadership is aligned with recovery principles, and staff at all levels are engaged in shifting language, expectations, and practices. This kind of culture change is both powerful and visible. You can feel it. You can feel it, literally feel it in the way that people interact, the autonomy that clients have, the way that decisions are made, and even how success is defined. These three models aren't necessarily like one isn't necessarily good and another is bad, right? But they do show us where we are and where we're headed. Transformation doesn't happen overnight, but awareness is the first step. As we continue our session, let's think about what kind of approach your organization is using now and what kind of approach it wants to grow into.
Good morning, everybody. So as I get going here, we're going to launch another poll. All right. So between the three options, additive, selective, or transformative, what approach to system change best reflects where your organization is at the current time? Now, please remember, there's no right or wrong responses. This is simply an opportunity to reflect on where your organization currently stands in integrating peer recovery support services. One of the most important, I'm good at time to go. So we're seeing a pretty good balance, between people who have seen an additive approach and selective approaches. But it looks like for the bulk of, or for at least a large portion of our attendees today, most everybody gets to experience a transformative type of culture shift within their organization, which is pretty awesome. I think that shows some of the great work that some of our forerunners have been able to do in this field for us. One of the most important lessons we've learned in integrating peer roles and shifting culture is that top-down and bottom-up approaches are both essential, and they must be aligned. Top-down changes from leadership that includes setting a clear vision, allocating funding, updating policies, and creating space for peers to thrive. Without this kind of support, culture change often stalls due to a lack of structure or accountability. But equally important is bottom-up change. Frontline staff, especially peer recovery support specialists, bring lived experience and practical knowledge of what actually works. They identify gaps, model peer values, and often push the culture to evolve through everyday actions. As we move forward, reflect on your organization. Where is leadership already stepping up? Where are frontline voices like peer recovery support staff specialists leading change? And how can we build stronger bridges between the two?
Well, when we meet in the middle, I think we get the best of both, right? We get structure and innovation, policy and practice, vision and real world insight. So this approach, meeting in the middle, right? Both top down and bottom up approach to change aligns values and implementation. It builds mutual trust, shares accountability, and drives sustainable systemic transformation.
Regardless of which of the three approaches to systems change you find in your organization, the transformation must be endorsed and promoted from the top down, as well as being implemented from the bottom up. We've been talking about the need to move from surface level changes to meaningful system wide transformation. But what does that actually look like in practice? Where do we start? Over the next 4 slides, we're going to explore 4 critical pillars of organizational cultural shift. These are areas where changes are not just possible, they're necessary if we want to integrate peer recovery support with integrity and impact. These pillars aren't isolated, they're interconnected, and progress in one area often creates momentum in the others. Together, they create the conditions where peer roles can thrive and where recovery-oriented systems of care can take root. Here's what we'll cover. Without visible and local commitment from leadership, culture change struggles to gain traction. Leaders have to set the tone, model the values, and make decisions that reflect a recovery-oriented vision. Supervision is one of the most important and often overlooked levers of culture. How we support, evaluate, and grow peer staff has to reflect their unique role, replicate clinical or hierarchical norms. Even the most recovery oriented teams can be undermined by outdated or inconsistent policies. We'll explore how aligning policy with peer values and scope of practice removes barriers and clarifies expectations. Lastly, we'll look at how centering equity, particularly in compensation, advancement, and representation, ensures that peer roles are sustainable, respected, and reflective of the communities we serve. As we go through each of these, I invite you to consider, where is your organization strong? Where is there room for your organization to grow? And what would change if all four pillars were firmly in place?
Wow, great questions, Mike. So let's begin with the leadership pillar, because we've already identified that leadership is one of the two methods for culture shift, sorry. This slide invites us to think about how organizational leaders can model commitment to peer values. It's not enough to hire peer support workers and just sort of hope for the best. When executives and managers actively affirm the value of lived expertise, when they involve peer recovery support specialists in high-level decision-making and make space for peer leadership, it signals that peers aren't just an add-on. They are an essential part of the framework of the organization and the valuable services that it provides. Examples include inviting peer recovery support specialists to serve on hiring panels, strategy teams, or task forces. It also means leaders being willing to share power and name lived expertise as a critical and respected form of expertise alongside clinical and academic knowledge. When leadership shows up for peer inclusion, it creates safety for others in the organization to do the same.
As mentioned previously, supervision is often one of the most powerful and neglected levers of peer integration. Traditional supervision models often fall short because they evaluate peer recovery support specialists using clinical norms rather than peer specific values. In a recovery oriented culture, peer workers are ideally supervised by people with existing peer support credentials and professional experience. When that's not possible, supervisors must be deeply trained in peer values, ethics, and boundaries. Reflective supervision, where the focus is on self-awareness, role clarity, and mutual learning, is the best practice in peer support. It replaces top-down correction with collaborative growth. This structure helps protect peer roles from drift, reinforces fidelity to the model, and increases retention and satisfaction among peer recovery support specialists. The third training of this series will focus on supervision as a pillar of cultural change. Does your supervision structure reflect peer values? What would need to shift to make supervision more supportive and reflective for peer support staff?
Wow, good questions. So here we're talking about the written backbone of organizational culture, policy. If your mission says you support peer-led care, but your documentation, hiring, or conduct policies are based on clinical or deficit-based models, there's a disconnect. Recovery-aligned policies support mutuality, autonomy, and non-clinical approaches. We're going to focus on this pillar today after we cover a few other topics that will build the foundation for policy alignment.
Finally, culture shift must include workforce equity. It's not enough to talk about valuing lived expertise. We have to invest in it. Peers must be paid fairly, receive benefits, and have access to training, certification, and leadership development. They should see a future in your organization, not just a temporary or tokenized role. We also need to address the stigma that still exists towards peer roles. That means creating wellness supports, recognizing trauma exposure, and holding space for emotional labor. Peers can't thrive if they're treated as second class staff. Equity isn't just about fairness, it's about sustainability. If we want peer support to be part of our long term fabric of recovery care, we have to build systems that honor and invest in it. We will focus more on this pillar in the fourth training of this series.
Nice. So listed on this slide are some core values of peer recovery support that we pulled from the national guidelines for peer specialists and supervisors. As we talk about integrating peer recovery support into behavioral health systems, it's important to acknowledge something fundamental. Peer recovery roles do not exist in a vacuum. They are part of a larger system that includes clinical providers, medical staff, administrators, case managers, and support teams, all working toward the shared goal of helping people move toward health and recovery. Sometimes these roles use different languages or frameworks. Clinical roles may focus on diagnosis and treatment. Medical teams may center physical health and medications, and administrators may prioritize structure and compliance. And yet, we are all working in service of people's healing, and that creates powerful opportunities for alignment and collaboration. Peer recovery support is guided by a set of values that are distinct, but they're not incompatible with other disciplines. I'm going to just say that again. Peer recovery support is guided by a set of values that are distinct, but they're not incompatible with other disciplines. These values aren't just peer values. These are human values, and in many ways, they are the values that remind us why we got into this work in the first place. So let's take a moment to reflect on that shared ground. Here's a question for you to consider. Which of these core values stands out to you in the role that you currently serve in? Which of these core values stands out to you in the role that you currently serve in? It might be a value that you try to embody in your day-to-day work, or maybe it's something that's just deeply personal to your professional identity. Maybe it's a value you see a need for on your team or in your department. Love it. I'm seeing some things pop in the chat. This is great. Facilitate change, strengths focused, person driven, mutual and reciprocal, honest and direct. Yeah, there's another strengths focused, mutual and reciprocal. Nice. Open-minded. This is good stuff. Honest and direct. I mean, look at how we can see that even though these are core values that are prominent in the peer support movement, that regardless of the role that you currently serve in within your organization, whether it's administrator, director, program manager, counselor, caseworker, social worker, nurse, that you can find a commonality, a shared commonality with at least one of these values. So Mike, you want to take us on to shifting culture through language?
Yeah, absolutely. One area that can begin to shift culture and policies is the use of recovery centered language. Science tells us that language shapes and reflects perception. The language that we use as organizations matters not just on a cultural level, but also on an individual level. It represents our deepest beliefs about the worth of people who receive services and their ability to recover. If there's no transformation inside of us, all of the structural change in the world will have no impact. When reviewing language, Start with public-facing materials like your website, brochures, wall signage, and even program names. Include people receiving services in this review. Ask them to identify language that feels disempowering and provide suggestions of alternative terms or phrases. What do they want to see on the walls when they come in for services? What do they want to see programs described and named? Then convene an inclusive and diverse work group of internal staff to review forms, policies, communication alerts, and training materials. In both the public-facing and internal review of language, consider using worksheets that list out non-recovery centered terms or phrases, who use it and where, and what other terms could be used to better align with language to be more recovery centered.
So culture shift doesn't stop with our values or with the language that we use. It also shows up in how we as leaders view peer recovery support workers. And it shapes the way that peer recovery support specialists are integrated or excluded. This slide illustrates a core shift we must make to truly support the integration of peer recovery support, moving from a deficit-based lens to a strengths-based lens. Deficit-based thinking is deeply embedded in many systems. It tends to focus on pathology, what's wrong, what's broken, or what needs to be fixed. This approach is aligned with just traditional models, but it contradicts with peer recovery support models that are focused on hope, choice, and healing. You may have noticed on the core value slide that strengths-based is a peer recovery support value. I also saw some people put that in the chat. So it's not just a recovery support value, but it's a value that a lot of people within our system of care recognize. This aligns with the strengths-based lens that focuses on a person's abilities, their inner resources, lived wisdom, and potential. It asks the question, what lived wisdom and unique contributions do peer recovery support workers bring to our team? It values authenticity, relational insight, and the ability to connect with others in ways no other role can. This is the foundation of the peer recovery support movement and is essential for recovery-centered systems. This change in mindset must be reflected across the organization in leadership models, in policy language, in documentation practices, supervision, and day-to-day decision-making. Take a moment to review the chart. Reflect on your team's current lens. Consider where your team's beliefs and practices align with the strengths-based approach. And then think, where do you see opportunities for deeper consistency or growth? And then think back to which of our core values overlapped. Which of those shared values can you build on and strengthen to make that shift from deficit-based to strengths-based? From deficit-based to strengths-based. I
That's a
love
lot of
that,
really good
Anna.
stuff to think about. Yes, the chat is lively with engagement. So appreciate that. Shows attentiveness and just how robust this conversation is. Integrating peer recovery support specialists into behavioral health systems requires more than hiring individuals with lived experience. It demands a careful examination of the organizational environment in which they work. One of the most powerful levers for cultural and structural change is policy. Internal policies shape how roles are defined, how services are delivered, and how people are supported in the workplace. When policies are misaligned with the core values of peer support, mutuality, hope, choice, and empowerment, they can unintentionally exclude, limit, or underutilize peer workers. This often leads to role confusion, isolation, and even attrition amongst peer recovery support specialists, undermining the potential benefits they bring to the organization and the people served. By systematically reviewing and revising internal policies, organizations can clarify, and protect the unique role of peer workers. Remove systemic barriers to equity and inclusion. Promote recovery-oriented practices across all levels of care, and demonstrate a genuine commitment to lived experience as a source of expertise. The next session will guide you through identifying existing policy barriers, applying a recovery-oriented lens to policy development, and making changes that foster sustainability. Meaningful integration of peer support in your workforce.
All right, let's take a moment to reflect on where policy might be getting in the way of effective peer recovery support. So we're going to use a word cloud to gather your input. And the question is, what are some types of policies that might be misaligned with peer recovery support work? So Tony, can you launch that word cloud for us? And I think you can just drop your answers right in the chat and they'll pop up on the word cloud whenever Tony gets it open. Yeah, so using just one or two words, list the type of policies that misalign with peer recovery support work. And just type those in the chat and they'll pop right up on the screen. Love it. We're already getting some answers. What are some types of policies that might misalign with peer recovery support work? Definitely boundaries is a top one in the chat right now. Background checks, job descriptions. Yep. I love it. Ethics. Look at all these things. Technical jargon. Self-disclosure. Right. Policies around self-disclosure. Good stuff. I love that you're just type in whatever comes to mind. We have some really great answers in here. Clinical supervision. Clinical licenses. Yeah, great one. Any kind of role expectation. Length of time. That's an interesting one. Yeah, right. You're definitely no right or wrong answers here. It's just like whatever you've identified as being misaligned with peer recovery support work. Nice. All right, let's move forward. I love it. Deficit-based policies. I mean, there's just so many good things on here. Previous job experience, misunderstandings, all kinds of stuff. So now that you've had a chance to identify some policies in your organization that might be misaligned, let's walk through some examples of different types of policies that might sound neutral. They might sound neutral, but actually work against peer support practices. So here's the first policy, and it's related to documentation. All staff must use DSM-5 diagnostic language in documentation, right? This is an example of a policy that we've seen in an organization before. So at first glance, this might seem reasonable, especially in clinical environments, but here's the concern. Peer recovery support specialists are not clinical providers, and requiring them to use diagnostic or medicalized language pushes them into a clinical role that is outside their scope, and more importantly, outside their philosophy. Peer support is grounded in mutuality, shared experience, and non-pathologizing language. When peers are forced to document using terms like substance use disorder or symptom severity, it removes their authentic voice and can cause harm to the people that they're supporting. This type of policy also contributes to what we call role drift. It blurs the lines between peer and clinical roles, and peers may begin to feel pressure to act more like case managers or therapists in order to be seen as legitimate or professional. So the issue isn't just documentation, it's about identity, integrity, and alignment with peer support values. In a recovery-oriented system, a better approach would be to allow peer recovery support specialists to document in their own words or the words of the person served, centered on strengths, goals, progress, and mutual connection, while ensuring those notes are appropriately distinguished from a clinical record. So let's look at the supervision policy. All staff are to be supervised by a licensed clinician within their department. Pretty common policy in our system of care. This is a common setup in clinical environments. It's common, especially where services are tied to Medicaid reimbursement. But when we apply this model to peer recovery support specialists, it becomes problematic for a few important reasons. First, clinical supervisors, no matter how well-meaning, may not fully understand the peer role. They may come from a diagnostic or hierarchical model and unintentionally impose expectations that are incompatible with peer support values. For example, clinical supervisor might evaluate a peer's performance based on how clinically appropriate their documentation is, or how well they manage boundaries in the same way a therapist would. This leads to role drift, where peer recovery support specialists start adapting to clinical expectations rather than staying rooted in mutuality, hope, and lived experience. Best practice, according to national guidance from SAMHSA and the National Association of Peer Supporters, is that peer recovery support specialists should be supervised by someone who is themselves credentialed in peer support, like CRSS or CPRS or NCRS, or at the very least, deeply trained in peer support ethics, values, and scope of practice. Here in Illinois, administrative rules tied to Medicaid billing currently require, that peer recovery support specialists be supervised by a qualified mental health professional, or QMHP, for services to be billed to Medicaid. By definition, a QMHP must be an individual who possesses a master's or doctoral degree in counseling and guidance, rehabilitation counseling, social work, psychology, pastoral counseling, family therapy, or a related field. This presents a serious dilemma. On one hand, we want peer services to be sustainable and billable, right? On one hand. But on the other hand, the supervision and documentation requirements pull peer recovery support specialists back into a clinical structure that doesn't reflect their purpose or values. It puts peer programs in a bind. Do we meet the billing requirement and risk compromising the integrity of peer support? Or do we uphold peer principles and risk losing funding? This is why policy advocacy matters. We need systems that recognize the distinctiveness of peer roles, not just in theory, but in structure. That includes creating a path for credentialed peer supervisors to be recognized as legitimate supervisors for the purpose of Medicaid billing.
Yeah, so let's take a look at two more examples of policies that may seem standard in many organizations, but can actually undermine the integration of peer support. First, there's a line you might see in a peer recovery support specialist job description. Reads like this: will assess patient progress and develop individualized treatment plans. While this may sound clinical and goal oriented, it actually steps far outside of the scope of a peer role. Peer recovery support specialists are not clinical providers. We do not assess, diagnose, or develop treatment plans. Instead, we walk alongside individuals using mutual support, share recovery stories, and help people define and pursue goals from their own lived experience. Asking peers to perform clinical functions not only creates role confusion, it also jeopardizes ethical boundaries. Now let's consider this dress code policy. A dress code policy might read, visible tattoos, facial piercings, or streetwear may result in disciplinary action. Now it's pretty clear. This type of policy might appear to promote professionalism, but it can also send the message that certain lived experiences like incarceration, homelessness, or street based culture must be hidden or erased to be accepted. Peers bring authenticity, cultural congruence, and trust into spaces where these things are often missing. Policing appearance can suppress identity and disconnect peer recovery support specialists from the communities they're best positions to reach.
Yeah, so let's continue looking at how certain policies can unintentionally create barriers to meaningful peer integration. These next two examples are especially important when we talk about workforce equity. So here's a hiring policy you might see. No applicants with prior felony convictions will be considered. What? This is a major red flag when it comes to peer support. Many peer recovery support specialists have histories that include incarceration, arrest, or other involvement with the legal system. In fact, that lived experience is often part of what allows us to build trust with others and to model hope. These blanket exclusion policies, they not only contradict recovery values of redemption and second chances, that they may also violate state laws like Illinois ban the box legislation, which prohibits employers from asking about criminal history too early in the hiring process. Let's look at compensation. Here's another one. Peer recovery support specialist positions are entry level and capped at $15 an hour. Wow. This kind of wage cap sends a harmful message that peer work is less valuable or less skilled than clinical roles. In reality, peer support requires deep emotional labor, cultural humility, and a level of self-awareness that comes from both lived experience and formal training. Underpaying peers reinforces stigma, limits retention, and blocks career advancement. If we want to build a sustainable peer workforce, we have to invest in it financially, professionally, and structurally.
Next, let's look at our last two policies that often go unnoticed, but can have major impacts on how peer recovery support specialists are valued and retained within organizations. The first one, peer support workers are not eligible for supervisory or coordinator roles. Now, this kind of policy creates a structural glass ceiling. It tells peer workers that while their lived experience is valuable, it's not leadership material. It reinforces a top down hierarchy where only clinical or traditionally credentialed staff shape policy and supervise teams. In a recovery oriented system, we should be building leadership pathways for peer workers, not capping them. When peers can lead, coordinate, and supervise, it strengthens the workforce and brings real life insight into decision making spaces. Let's check out the next one. All staff must maintain a productivity rate of 80% billable services weekly. Wow. This may be standard for clinical roles, but peer support often doesn't fit cleanly into billable models. Peer work is relationship based. It includes time spent building trust, engaging in informal support, connecting people to resources, and simply being present, all of which may not be reimbursable. Applying rigid productivity metrics can pressure peer recovery support specialists to document or deliver services in a way that mimics clinical roles, leading to role drift, burnout, and loss of fidelity of peer values.
All right. Thanks, Mike. So we've spent time together today already exploring key strategies for culture shift, landing on this emphasis on policy alignment. And now it's time to apply what we've learned. So what we're going to do is create some breakout rooms. And in the breakout activity, you and your group will look at one of the organizational policies that we just discussed, or you can share an actual policy from your organization in the same category. And then you'll work together to revise it to be more recovery aligned. So your task is to identify where it may conflict with peer support values and then rewrite it in a way that reflects principles like mutuality, self-determination, strengths-based language, and inclusion of lived expertise. This is not about perfection. It's about practice. Practice. We want you to experiment with how recovery values actually show up in written policy. Because remember, policy is one of the clearest expressions of organizational culture. So Tony, can you open the breakout rooms and then give us any further directions?
Yes, so I'm going to open the breakout rooms. I see a few folks need to leave, so some rooms may have a few less folks than others. But each room has a specific question that we're going to come in and drop the question into your group. So if you could just give us a moment, the rooms will be open for 10 minutes. So we will go ahead and open those. If you have any issues, come on back to the main session. Trenda and I are going to come into each room and drop those questions for you. So we will see you back here in 10 minutes, everybody. Have a great session.
Welcome back. So we're going to give each group a minute or so to just share what you did to align that policy to be more recovery aligned. So starting with the group that worked on documentation. Who's the reporter for the documentation policy group?
It would be me. Although we just started, we were doing a little summary at the end, so I made sure I captured the points. So I hopefully I got all of it, but please someone from my group speak up if I didn't. The statement we were given for the policy was documentation policy, all staff must use DSM-5 diagnostic language in documentation. And we talked about revising that. A couple of people spoke to their workplaces having separate processes for clinical treatment work and documentation compared with peer recovery services. So we said in operation, we might have separate processes, but also just the language of saying all staff when really the intention of the policy seems to be all clinical treatment providers.
Nice. I like that. Just a little nuance, right? A little nuance can change it drastically. Good stuff. Thanks, Laura. All right. What group had job description? Job description. Who's the reporter for job description policy?
Yep, I think that was us where we were, the statement was about treatment planning and assessing, which we concluded was very clinical. And so we put together a little bit more about a statement more about collaborating with clients and less about assessing or diagnosing or developing treatment plans. And with a special note, I guess, to helping with, so the statement that we wrote was, or that I think Tom wrote it, was empowering clients rather than doing for clients, and steering them, kind of guiding along with treatment planning instead of doing treatment planning, assessing, that kind of stuff.
Nice. Thank you, Alicia. Appreciate you jumping in. I was ready to move on. Keep it moving. I learned that from Ricardo. Keep it moving. Keep it moving. All right. What group tried to tackle supervision policy?
We talked about supervision policy, and something that we kind of came up with was all staff, including peer support specialists, will receive supervision that is appropriate to their role. Staff will have access to supervision from licensed clinicians for clinical guidance if needed, but they can also receive supervision from a supervisor in the peer support role. I think that's really important to have, obviously, the peers in supervisor roles, and then they should also be able to give supervision.
Nice. Ooh, that's a good one. Thanks, Mitchell. I love that. Sort of like a hybrid model of supervision that really captures that peer to peer model. That's the national best practice. Woohoo! Nice. All right. So I saw someone in the chat said they would weigh in. I think that was Micah on the dress code policy.
Yeah, I think, did you call that one and nobody responded?
Not yet.
Oh, okay.
Oh, you.
Well,
Yep, go ahead.
oh, well, we can go. I thought that second one was that, and we missed our chance. But so we talked about the dress code policy, what we talked about in the big group with the tattoos, facial piercings, and the dress. We talked about how with the peers, especially like if they're going into the community to work with people, homeless, all different types of populations, that if they dress even business casual, it could be a barrier for them when they're working with the people, because they may be intimidated by just someone that's dressed up in their minds. They may be going in the community where even wearing shorts is just kind of a natural part of the environment. So we talked about having a dress code that was using language similar to like appropriate for the environment that they're working in. We talked about facial or even tattoos in general, that a lot of our folks, our peers have experience in correctional institutions or backgrounds that may have come with tattoos, even some that may be offensive or, not necessarily promote recovery. So we kind of talked about the need for maybe covering certain tattoos if it's not conducive to recovery or it's vulgar, things like that. But otherwise, I mean, that's kind of another way that you can connect with the people that you're working with, because you do look different than maybe what they're used to as far as professional counselors or therapists, things like that. So trying to soften that language to not be so rigid and so strict on what we have always seen maybe as professional.
Nice. Love that. It makes me think specifically about Chestnut's Metro program, their transit program, where they have peers working on the transit systems in the Metro East area. And they're really, boots on the ground, working directly with individuals that are on the streets or riding the transit just to get out of the elements. And who wants to show up in a business casual dress when the people that you're trying to create mutuality with are not dressed that way? I love that reframe, Micah. Thank you. So what group had hiring? Is there a reporter for the hiring policy group?
Yes, I've had that. So we discussed different things. Partly, the theme was looking at that issue on a case-by-case basis, as everyone's individual and coming from their own background of charges, and looking at the qualifications of the position itself more so than the charges and convictions, looking at mitigating circumstances and efforts that the person has made in rehabilitation since the conviction, then assistance with appeals from healthcare record chart, removal or expungement of charges, helping to assist in that. But we also recognize that a lot of agencies or businesses are accredited or have rules that they have to follow with DCFS or accreditation entities that determine what their hiring policies are in large part, and a lot of agencies just cannot hire whoever they think would be great or know would be great. They have their own policies from higher ups that they have to, that dictate that to some extent. So it's more of a there's work to be done at that level as well.
Nice. Thanks, Robert. I love that you recognize that sometimes these policies that are organizational level have a higher advocacy call in order to be able to make them more recovery aligned. All right. Next group, compensation. Did we have someone tackle that?
Hi, I'll speak for our group. So
Okay.
our biggest concern when we were reading that was the word capped. So it's capped at $15 an hour, and we were kind of questioning what were those, regulations that went into that policy for it being capped at $15 an hour, and the challenges that may create or barriers to getting those positions filled.
Mm-hmm. Nice. Yeah, I don't want my salary capped at $15 an hour. I want growth, career advancement. Nice. All right. How about, speaking of career advancement, did we have a group that tackled that policy?
I guess I'll go. We talked about how, based on merit and things like that, that the people should be recognized for, their quality of work and given supervisory or higher roles based on performance and based on knowledge, as opposed to, people looking down on them, because they're not good enough or requiring some kind of a higher degree, oh, you could be a supervisor if you have a bachelor's, those kinds of things. So that is, something that could create a barrier depending on the agency. Here we do have that at NAMI, where there are people that are, recognized and given like shift lead roles and things like that. So, there is some ability for growth here. So, but yeah, it depends on the agency though. And, it's not always consistent. And so that is a thing that could be a barrier to people's employment when they are very talented and gifted and can really be a good person in that role.
Wow, thanks, Lisa. If you stick around for the other 3 sessions in our training series, we are going to talk about that more and talk about how to create equity in the career advancement space. So I love that. And then there was one last group, productivity. Did anybody tackle the productivity policy?
I can share for the group. So we didn't really do much with the wording of the policy. We talked a lot about how this is such a challenging policy because of the need to sustain peer support programs, but also balancing that with staying true to the model and how challenging that can be, especially when the programs are not tied to a grant. So that's as far as we got, is really like, it is a big barrier because of the requirements to be able to sustain a program.
Definitely. Thanks, Ashley. Really appreciate your feedback on that. I think we can all recognize just how some of these policies are systemically structured to support systems, right? To support the system. They're not systemically structured to support the integration of peer recovery support work. And so it's going to take some strong systemic advocacy to shift some of the ways that the policies are structured and why they're structured that way. So, Tony, you don't have to share slides yet. I'm just going to ask the group, now that you've had a chance to sort of explore some ways that you can shift culture and policy to influence peer integration, what is one step that your organization can take to begin shifting culture and policy to better integrate peer recovery services? What is one step your organization can take to begin shifting? Oh, thank you, Tony. I was copying and pasting it. You got it. I love having a virtual producer. Love it. So Robert says hiring. What is one step your organization can take to begin shifting culture and policy to better integrate peer recovery services? This is your call to action, your action step. When you leave this training, what's one step you're going to take? Maybe it's a small change, like revising a job description. Nice. I see training staff. We need a CRSS supervisor. Yes, come on, say that louder. Say that louder. Job descriptions. Perfect. I love that, Robert. Have management supervisor team meet to discuss it, right? So that it's not just isolated to one area. Mandatory tattoos. Come on, Mark. That's a good one. We're all getting mandatory tattoos. I love that I'm seeing so many things about team leads, supervisory leadership roles. This just makes my heart smile. When I first started working on the Illinois Warm Line, there was no leadership pathway whatsoever. It was everybody had the same role and that was it. And we developed a career pathway so that people could move up and get compensated for that, from interns to uncredentialed peer support workers to credentialed peer workers to shift lead to team lead to manager to director, right? We created that pathway. And so I love that you're thinking about that. So many great ideas, and I'm gonna hold you accountable to this, right? These are action steps that you're saying I'm gonna take when I leave this training. So how about we shift into closing this out, because I see some people saying they need to leave. So let's get some good information in the chat, some links, some opportunities that exist. Tony, if you want to take it from here.
Wow, I can't believe we're already at this point. But before we close today, we want to leave you with one more tool. Peer Careers Illinois will support your continued work as a statewide resource designed to uplift and empower peer support professionals in Illinois. It's a centralized hub where peer support specialists can discover job opportunities, connect with employers, and access the tools they need to grow in their careers. This NAMI Illinois resource is free for both job seekers and employers, and we encourage you to explore it and share it with your teams. It's one more way to get connected and stay connected and keep growing together. I'm going to drop that link with some others in a second. For all the peer supporters on this training, we hope you will join us for a free 2-day training that Peer Power is hosting in September. You don't want to miss this engaging opportunity for mutual learning among peers working in crisis settings from across the state. If you're not a peer support worker, then share it with someone who is. We did drop that link, and there are 2 different dates available in 2 different locations. As that does conclude our training, I did drop a link for the 3 remaining dates. This was our first training in our 4-part series on strengthening the workforce through peer integration. If you don't already have a registration for the upcoming trainings in the series, the link is below, and it will also be sent in your emails that follow if you are registered for the upcoming. I think there's a bunch of you registered for next week. Please also complete this short training evaluation. For those who already dropped off, we're going to go ahead and email this to everybody. Oops, I didn't hit send. All right, I'm fired. This is our evaluation. Please complete this form and share your feedback by scanning the QR code or by clicking on the link in the chat. And I'll turn it back to you, Trenda, for any closing remarks. Yes, you can laugh all you want. It's been fun. It's been amazing to be with you guys today.
It is. And that's the authenticity of peer support just coming out even in what we do here, because we're not trying to come here as the experts. We're coming with information to share in a mutual way, but also to have fun in the process. And so we appreciate you so much for what you've done. And I saw, will there be CEUs for this series? Yes, we are waiting on the Illinois Certification Board to approve our CEU application. I've been told they are backed up on their applications, but as soon as we get our program number and the number of CEUs we can award, we will send you your CE certificates. So yes, yes, yes. And slides will be emailed. We'll also post them on Peer Power's website. There'll also be access to a recording. So if you missed a portion of something, you can go back and listen to that recording. We'll be sharing that with DBHR. I think they'll be sending that out. We'll also post a link to that on Peer Power's website. Good questions. Thank you all so very much. We appreciate you being here, and we'll see you next Tuesday if you're signed up for the second training in the series. And thank you, Mike, for co-facilitating. Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.